The hangar was a cavern of noise and echoing announcements, a chaos my father thrived on. My father, Robert, a retired corporate CEO who measured the world in stock. Prices and prestige shoved me toward the cockpit of the F-22. It wasn't a playful push, it was a dismissal, an act of theater for the benefit of my brother Alex, the family's golden boy, who stood by smirking. "Go on," my father laughed, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Show your brother the plane you get to wipe down." The humiliation was a familiar heat on my cheeks, just another entry in the long ledger of slights I carried inside me. As I stumbled forward to catch my balance, the worn cuff of my mechanic—his jumpsuit slid back, revealing the stark black ink on my inner wrist. TG-0717. It was just a string of characters, meaningless to most, but not to everyone. A silver-haired officer standing nearby, a full colonel with command in his eyes, froze mid-sentence. His polite smile vanished, replaced by a look of raw, unfiltered shock. His gaze was fixed on my wrist. "Tango Golf, 0717, he whispered, the words cutting through the hangar's din like a blade. The air seemed to thin, the chatter around us dying instantly. He looked from my wrist to my eyes. "My God," he breathed. "You're Top Gun." A wave of silence spread from us outwards. My father's mocking smile froze, then collapsed as his face drained. Of all color, his eyes wide with a horrifying dawning comprehension. 30 minutes earlier, I was just trying to survive the event. My father was holding court, loudly telling a story about Alex's latest legal victory to anyone who would listen. Colonel Davies, the base commander, had approached our group with a welcoming smile. My father, seizing the opportunity to impress, clapped the colonel on the shoulder and gestured toward me. "And this is my daughter, Eva," he'd announced, his tone dripping with condescending affection. "She's just a mechanic here. Loves getting her hands dirty, right, honey?" He winked at the colonel, expecting him to share the joke. I saw the colonel's smile tighten by a millimeter, a flicker of professional offense that my father was completely blind to. At that moment, a cold fury settled over me. This wasn't just family drama anymore. He was trivializing a uniform in front of its commander. He thought he was just putting his disappointing daughter in her place once again. He had no idea he'd just publicly misidentified a combat asset in front of her commanding officer. To understand the protocol-driven reckoning that was about to unfold, you have to understand. The two call signs I answered, the one my family gave me and the one I earned in the sky. To truly understand that moment on the tarmac, you have to understand the two separate lives I was living. They were worlds that orbited each other but could never touch, one defined by their narrative, and the other defined by a crushing, high-stakes reality they refused to see. This duality was never clearer than at a family dinner about a year before. The entire evening was an altar built to my brother Alex. He had just closed a moderately successful real estate deal, and my father, Robert, was holding court, raising his wine glass in a toast. He beamed at my brother, the successful lawyer, the one who had followed the proper path. To Alex, he'd announced to the table, the future of this family. I had just returned from Nellis Air Force Base, having survived and graduated from the USAF Weapons School. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, a crucible designed to break the best pilots in the world and forge them into something more. I was exhausted down to my bones, but I was also humming with a quiet, powerful sense of accomplishment that I had never known. I figured, just this once, it might be enough. I waited for a lull in the conversation. "I finished my advanced training course," I said, my voice feeling small in the room. My father, without even looking up from his steak, reached over and patted my hand. "Cat's nice, dear," he said, the words a perfect dismissal. More wrenches to turn, I suppose. He then turned to my uncle and chuckled. "We call her our little grease monkey." The name landed like a physical blow. A graduate of the most elite aerial combat school on the planet, and, in my own house, I was still just the girl with the dirty hands. The internal ledger clicked over. Another massive, unspoken achievement, filed away next to all the others they'd never acknowledged. I saw the academic awards they missed because of Alex's soccer games. I saw the busted car I had to fix myself during college because his tuition was the priority. It was all there, in that one dismissive pat on my hand. My monumental victory had been reduced to vocational training. Later that evening, my mother, Linda, a woman who treated family peace like a fragile piece of glass, found me in the kitchen. She sighed, that familiar, weary sound of surrender. "You know how your father is, honey," she said, her voice a soft apology for his behavior. "He's from a world of boardrooms and stock prices. He just doesn't understand your hobby." The word hung in the air between us. Hobby. As if I was collecting stamps instead of mastering a 20-ton supersonic weapon of war. "It's easier to just let him think what he wants," she finished, turning back to the dishes. In that moment, I felt a profound and chilling isolation. It wasn't just that my father didn't see me. My mother was asking me to remain invisible. But there was another world. The quiet shame of that dinner table dissolves the second the canopy locks into place. Here, there are no families, no history, no nicknames. There is only the mission. My call sign is Valkyrie. My world is the bone-white glow of the heads-up display and the steady rhythm of my own breathing through the oxygen mask. "Valkyrie, this is Echo, bandit at your 6 high aspect. Go Winchester on target Alpha." The voice of my wingman, Captain Kai Echo Jin, a man who had seen my flight logs and never once questioned my place in the sky, was a calm anchor in the storm. The pressure starts instantly as I bank hard left. My G-suit inflates, squeezing my legs and torso. A violent hug from the machine designed to keep the blood in my brain. 9 Gs feels like a concrete giant is sitting on your chest. Your vision tunnels, your blood turns to lead, and every limb weighs 1,000 pounds, but you don't panic. You breathe a practiced guttural grunt that forces air into your lungs. You focus. You fly. The simulated bandit was good, but I was better. I pulled the Raptor into a defensive countermaneuver. A brutal, physics-defying climb that put me right on his tail. "Fox 2, I said calmly into the comms, my thumb depressing the trigger. "Splash 1. The system confirmed the hit. Back at the debrief, the lead instructor would tell me the maneuver was a 1 in 1,000 solution. There was no applause, no celebration, just the quiet, lethal fact of competence. It was a silent nod of respect from my peers. That was the only approval I really needed. For years, I let them believe the narrative. I thought keeping the peace was the mission. But on that tarmac, with my father's hand on my back and the colonel's eyes on my wrist, I realized the mission had changed. The truth had to be declassified. After the Family Day incident, I didn't go back to my quarters and rage. I didn't call my mother for a pointless circular conversation. The pilot in me took over, the strategist I was trained to be. An emotional confrontation was a losing battle. A sortie with no clear objective. My father thrived on drama. It was a battle space I would never win. No, this wasn't about revenge. My objective was simpler, colder, and far more absolute. It was a correction of the record. And the upcoming annual Air Force Ball, an event governed by the rigid, unbending laws of protocol and tradition, would be the perfect theater of operations. My father's ego was his greatest vulnerability, a predictable flight path I could easily intercept. I knew he couldn't resist the allure of perceived importance. Using my official channels, I arranged for a formal invitation to be sent to my parents and my brother. I secured them a place at Table 1, a very important person spot right next to the wing command staff and a visiting 2-star general from the Pentagon. The invitation, printed on heavy cardstock with a gold-embossed air, force seal, wasn't just an invitation for him, it was validation. He wouldn't see it as them honoring his mechanic daughter. He would see it as the military finally acknowledging a man of his stature. The bait was set. The final variable had to be locked. My plan couldn't hinge on hope, it had to be built on regulation. I scheduled a brief meeting with Colonel Davies's executive aide, a young captain, who lived and breathed protocol, a man for whom the rulebook was scripture. I didn't mention my family. I didn't show an ounce of emotion. My query was framed with professional detachment. "Sir, regarding the ball's presentation ceremony," I began. My voice, even, "Can you confirm that award citations will include the recipient?" Full list of special qualifications, as per Air Force Regulation 36-2803. He peered at me, intrigued by the specificity. He typed for a moment, his fingers clicking with crisp efficiency. "That's affirmative, Captain," he said, not looking up from his screen. "For the Pilot of the Year award, the citation will explicitly mention any advanced certifications. Weapons school graduation would be the lead item." A cold, clean certainty settled in my gut. The trap was armed. The RSVPs arrived in a single, confident email from my father. He was delighted. He thought he was coming to see the best mechanic get a pat on the back. He had no idea he was about to witness a full capabilities demonstration. The Air Force Ball was a world unto itself, a place where tradition and honor were the very air you breathed. The grand ballroom was a sea of immaculate blue dress uniforms, a living tapestry of service and sacrifice. Massive American and Air Force flags hung from the rafters, and the orchestra played softly, a sound completely at odds with the roar of the jets we flew. It was a room saturated with a quiet, profound gravity, and into this sacred space walked my father and my brother, looking utterly out of place in their expensive, flashy tuxedos. They moved through the crowd not with respect, but with the swagger of men who believed their money made them royalty everywhere they went. I saw my father lean over to my brother, Alex, and say something, his voice a condescending stage whisper. "A little stiff, don't you think?" he murmured, oblivious to the steely glares from the decorated officers standing nearby. I sat with them at table 1, a silent observer in my own life. I felt the familiar tension, the need to shrink myself to fit into their world, but tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't in their world, they were in mine. The awards ceremony began, the final and most prestigious honor of the night being the Wings Pilot of the Year award. Colonel Davies, a man whose quiet authority filled the entire room, took the stage. My heart began a slow, steady drumbeat against my ribs. I took a controlled breath, just as I would before a high G turn. My family, meanwhile, looked bored. "This year's recipient," Colonel Davies began, his voice resonating through the hall, has redefined the standards of aerial combat readiness. He spoke of a recent red flag exercise, the most intense and realistic combat training in the world. In a complex, multi-branch scenario, this pilot single-handedly engaged and defeated 8 simulated aggressor aircraft, a new base record. A low murmur of genuine awe rippled through the audience of my peers. At my table, I heard my father whisper to Alex, his voice thick with disdain. Probably some hotshot who thinks he's Tom Cruise. The comment was so perfectly him, so deeply ignorant of the skill and courage being described, that I almost smiled. He had no idea he was talking about his daughter. The colonel's voice boomed, drawing everyone's attention back to the stage. This pilot is not only an operator but a scholar of air dominance. The massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the Wings emblem, suddenly changed. An image appeared, the iconic, prestigious patch of the United States Air Force Weapons School. "A graduate with distinction," the colonel continued, pausing to let the weight of that statement settle over the room of experts who understood exactly what it meant. "Callsign designator, Tango Golf 0717. My father's face knitted in a brief, confused frown. The number was a faint echo in his memory, a ghost from the family day hangar he couldn't quite place. Then came the final words. "Please join me in honoring Captain Eva Valkyrie Rostova." The spotlight found me, and I stood. The room was a blur of faces, but I was acutely aware of the sudden, sharp intake of breath from my own table. I was no longer the grease monkey in a stained jumpsuit. I was a captain in the United States Air Force, my mess dress uniform crisp and perfect, the medals on my chest, medals they had never once asked about, gleaming under the lights. Every step I took toward that stage felt heavy, deliberate. Each footfall on the polished floor was a final, satisfying entry in a long and unbalanced ledger. The move was for forgotten birthdays. This one for the condescending pats on the head. This one was for being called a hobby. My focus was on stage, but I could feel my father's eyes on me. I could feel his world tilting on its axis. He saw the name on the screen, he heard the call sign, and in his mind he finally connected it to the tattoo on my wrist he had so carelessly exposed. The blood drained from his face as his brain cycled through confusion, then disbelief, then a dawning, soul-crushing horror. The final, killing blow was watching the 2-star general at his very own table rise to his feet and begin to applaud, his eyes fixed on me with profound, unmistakable respect. My father didn't collapse. He didn't make a sound. He simply sank. He sank back into his chair, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He was rendered speechless and small, his entire worldview shattered by a single, irrefutable fact. His daughter, the invisible one, had an authority he could never buy. My father spent his life in boardrooms making deals based on perceived power. In the end, it took just one call sign to teach him the meaning of actual authority. After I accepted the award, I didn't return to my family's table. I couldn't. Instead, I was immediately enveloped by a circle of my peers, my true peers. Colonel Davies clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes filled with a deep professional respect. The visiting generals from the Pentagon weren't just shaking my hand, they were asking about the kill chain sequence in the red flag exercise, discussing the tactical logic of my final maneuver. We were talking shop. They were treating me not as a curiosity or a woman who had won an award, but as an elite strategist, an equal. Across the room, I saw my family's table. It had become an island of silence in a buzzing sea of celebration. They were completely, utterly alone. No one approached them. No one looked their way. They were irrelevant. Before the final toasts were made, they simply slipped out. There was no dramatic exit, just a quiet, humiliating retreat into the shadows of a world that was not theirs, leaving behind a daughter they had finally, truly lost. 1 year later, the world looked different. I was standing in a briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base, the spiritual home of the USAF Weapons School. My flight suit no longer just had my name on it. Beneath it was the coveted black patch with the single word that meant everything in my world: instructor. Before me sat a new class of the Air Force's finest pilots, the top 1% who had made it to this crucible. They were the best of the best, and they were looking at me with a mixture of awe and apprehension. I was briefing them on a complex combat scenario involving fifth-generation stealth, integration, my voice calm and authoritative, my command of the material absolute. This, I thought to myself, was my real legacy. It wasn't a name in a corporate directory. It was shaping the minds and skills of the warriors who would own the sky long after I was gone. After the briefing, I walked out onto the flight line, the Nevada sun warm on my face. Captain Echo Jin fell into step beside me, along with 2 other instructors. We talked about the new class, about a tricky new software patch for the Raptor's avionics, and about who owed whom a drink after a particularly grueling simulation the day before. The conversation was easy, fluid, filled with the shared language and inside jokes of a team forged in immense pressure and total mutual respect. They knew my call sign, they knew my capabilities, and they knew the person behind the helmet. There were no false narratives here, no golden children, no need to shrink myself. This was my family now. A family built not on obligation but on competence. A family that saw me, understood me, and valued me for exactly who I was. Back in my office, amidst the quiet hum of mission-critical servers, a new email popped up. The subject line was blank. My father's name. I clicked it open, a flicker of something, maybe just morbid curiosity, stirring within me. The body of the message contained only 3 words. I was wrong. I read them once, then again. 10 years ago, those 3 words would have been a tectonic event in my life. I would have wept with relief, thinking I had finally earned his love. Now, I felt the strange, hollow echo of a battle that had already been won. The validation I had once craved from him felt like a foreign currency in a country I no longer lived in. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only distance. With a quiet click, I moved the message to the archive folder, unanswered. My eyes drifted back to the flight map on my main screen, a complex web of routes and objectives. The mission was waiting. My father thought a legacy was the name of a corner office. I learned a true legacy is the call sign respected in the sky. If you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always cleared for takeoff.